The desert sun struck like a hammer, burning the backs of both man and horse. But it was the sudden, harsh cry of a struggling wagon that made Silas McKade's heart seize. He hadn't expected to find anyone on this desolate stretch of the New Mexico plains, least of all a woman towering over her wagon like a mountain, wrestling with a broken wheel as if the world itself had betrayed her. She was impossible to ignore. Even from a distance, her figure commanded attention over 6 feet tall, with shoulders like sculpted stone and long, dark hair braided with silver beads that caught the sunlight and scattered it across the dusty terrain. Her green eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned her surroundings constantly, radiating both strength and a quiet wariness. Her leather tunic, adorned with beadwork and tribal embroidery, was worn but meticulously cared for, and a quiver of arrows rested across her back. A bow at her side. Silas nudged his horse closer, boots crunching on gravel. "Need a hand?" he called, keeping his voice steady but gentle. The woman froze for a heartbeat, then turned her gaze toward him. There was amusement there, almost a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "I'm handling it," she replied firmly, her voice deep and melodic, yet edged with authority. She grunted as she adjusted the stubborn wheel that had lodged itself on a jagged rock. Silas dismounted slowly, leather creaking. "Looks heavy," he said carefully. "I've got some strength left if you could use it." She studied him for a long moment, sizing him up, then finally nodded. 2 hands are better than 1. Together, they heaved the wheel off the rock. The strain in her arms was impressive, and yet she moved with precision, as if she had wrestled with problems far greater than a broken wagon. Silas couldn't help but notice the faint tattoos along her forearms, geometric shapes etched in dark ink that hinted at a storied heritage. "I'm Nahele," she said after a moment of silence. "And you are?" "Silas McKade," he replied. "Rancher, odd job hunter, occasional trouble magnet." He offered a wry smile. Nahele's laughter rang out like rolling thunder, startling birds into the sky. "I could use a trouble magnet right now," she admitted, shaking her head. The wagon was loaded with crates and bundles, some tied with rope, some wrapped in rough linen. Nahele explained, "These supplies are for the elders at Salt Creek Settlement. I misjudged the terrain and the wheel gave out at the worst possible moment." Silas studied the path ahead, narrow, winding, flanked by jagged cliffs and scattered boulders. "It's risky," he said. "I know the area. I can guide you." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You'd be risking yourself too." "I can manage." Silas hesitated, then shrugged. "Risk is part of the job." So they set off, the wagon creaking and groaning under the weight of its cargo. Dust rose around their boots and hooves, filling the air with grit and heat. Silas couldn't help but notice the way Nahele moved, each motion deliberate, each adjustment calculated. She wasn't just strong. She was disciplined, a master of survival. The afternoon sun burned overhead, relentless. Silas's shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. He stole glances at Nahele as she maneuvered the wagon along treacherous ridges. Her muscles rippled beneath her leather tunic as she heaved the wagon over an uneven rock. She was a formidable sight, and yet there was something quietly vulnerable in the way she kept checking the crates, making sure nothing was damaged. Suddenly, a whistle echoed through the canyon, high and sharp. Silas froze, hand instinctively tightening on his rifle. "That's no wind," he muttered. Nahele's eyes darted to the cliffs above. "Raiders," she said softly, her voice like a whisper of steel. Before Silas could react, a group of mounted men emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, their guns glinting in the sun. "Step aside, lady," one of them sneered. "That wagon looks heavy perfect for plunder." Nahele's green eyes flared with anger, but she didn't flinch. "You'll have to take me first," she said, Calm and measured. Silas drew his rifle, heart hammering, but Nahele didn't fight in the expected way. With lightning reflexes, she grabbed a rope dangling from the wagon, swung herself onto her horse, and launched into a series of strategic maneuvers that forced the raiders to scatter. Her movements were precise, like a dancer in battle, and her presence alone seemed to command the canyon. Silas covered her, using rocks for cover and picking off any riders who came too close. The echo of gunfire and the clatter of hooves against rock filled the canyon, blending with the shouts of the raiders and the occasional grunt of exertion from Nahele. It was chaotic, dangerous, and intoxicating all at once. By sunset, the bandits were gone, some fleeing into the desert, others limping back toward the cliffs. Nahele dismounted gracefully, brushing dust from her leather tunic. "You've got a good aim," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And you've got quite the swing," Silas replied. He admired her strength, her precision, and the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "I've never seen anyone handle a horse and rope like that." Nahele's gaze softened, though her jaw remained firm. "It's not for show. The elders taught me everything: combat, survival, strategy. I take no chances with those who depend on me." Silas nodded, sensing the weight of unspoken stories she carried. He had met many women in his life, but none like this towering Apache warrior. She was strength and vulnerability in equal measure, and in her presence he felt both humbled and compelled. Night approached, and the desert wind began to whip around the canyon walls. Silas offered, "I can stay with you tonight. Watch the wagon. Make sure nothing else comes along." Nahele studied him, her green eyes reflecting the dimming light. Finally, she nodded. "I'd appreciate that." They set up a small camp near the canyon's edge. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the jagged rocks. Nahele sat by the wagon, her hands resting lightly on the crates, eyes scanning the horizon. Silas couldn't help but admire her vigilance. This was someone used to carrying burdens, both physical and unseen. As the stars blazed overhead, the wind moaned through the canyon, tugging at Silas's coat. He watched Nahele, feeling an odd mix of awe and curiosity. There was more to her story than she let on. He could feel it in the way her jaw tightened when the wind blew too harshly, the way her eyes lingered on the horizon. She carried secrets, and he wondered how many he would ever learn. "You ever get a moment to rest?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence. Nahele shook her head. "Rest comes later. Survival doesn't wait." Silas nodded, understanding. In the West, survival was everything, and the desert had a way of stripping life down to its raw, essential parts. He felt the weight of the journey, the danger, and the fragile trust forming between them. That night, the desert seemed alive with possibility and peril. Silas listened to the rustle of the wind, the distant howl of coyotes, and the occasional creak of the wagon under the settling dust. Nahele remained alert, yet there was a calmness in her stance, an unspoken reassurance that whatever came, they would face it together. And as the fire burned low, Silas realized something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. Ignited not by ease or comfort, but by the rare, unyielding strength of the woman beside him. Tomorrow the canyon would demand more of them. The wagon would creak under burdens still too heavy. The path would twist and narrow, and danger would follow them like a shadow. But for the first time in a long while, Silas didn't feel entirely alone. In the vast, merciless expanse of the Old West, that was a start. Dawn broke in a haze of gold and rose, spilling across the jagged canyon walls and illuminating the wagon like a relic from another age. Silas stirred first, the smell of wood smoke and dust thick in the air. He stretched and poured a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, glancing over at Nahele. She was already on her feet, kneeling by the wagon, her long braid catching the light as she checked the wheels and the alignment of the axle. "Morning," Silas said cautiously. His voice hushed as though even the canyon itself might be listening. Sleep well? Nahel's green eyes flicked toward him, unamused. Lightly, she said. Too many eyes in the shadows. She tightened a leather strap around one of the crates, her massive hands precise despite their strength. Every night feels like a test out here. Silas nodded. He had a sense of what she meant. He had walked paths where danger was as common as sand. We'll get through today, he said. Just keep the wagon steady and I'll watch the trail ahead. They descended into the canyon, the path narrowing between sheer cliffs. Loose rocks shifted under the wagon wheels, and the sound of rolling stone echoed off the walls, startling a pair of hawks into the sky. Silas noticed faint carvings in the rocks, crude but deliberate, almost like warnings. Someone doesn't want this path used, he muttered, more to himself than to Nahele. Her eyes swept the canyon with a practiced vigilance. There's more than just bandits here, she said finally. This place carries old bloodlines, old grudges. The elders warned me about this stretch. They said it tests more than skill with horses or wagons. It tests the heart. Silas raised an eyebrow. The heart? She said nothing, letting the wind whip strands of her hair across her face. He could see her jaw tighten ever so slightly, the muscles in her neck flexing as she focused on the trail ahead. Her presence was overwhelming, almost hypnotic in its intensity. Hours passed with the sun rising higher and the heat pressing down relentlessly. Dust clung to their clothes, dry and fine, scratching against their skin. Nahele moved with a mixture of power and grace, adjusting the wagon's weight with careful hands, whispering commands to her horse, and checking every rope knot as though the wagon were a living thing. At one particularly narrow section, the canyon walls pressed in so close that the wagon barely fit. Nahele signaled Silas to dismount and scout ahead. He did, hopping from boulder to boulder with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Ahead, he noticed an ominous glint of metal, something embedded into the canyon wall. A trap, perhaps, hidden to snare travelers who didn't know the path. He returned quickly, waving his hand to warn her. There's a trap ahead, a metal hook set in the rock. Could tear through the wheel if we're not careful. Nahele's eyes narrowed. It's deliberate, she said. Someone has been watching this trail. They don't want anyone using it. She paused, placing her massive hands on the wagon wheel. We'll make it through. But we need to stay alert. Every step counts. They resumed their climb. Silas felt the weight of the wagon behind them, the groan of wood and leather echoing across the canyon. Each turn seemed more treacherous than the last, with jagged rocks threatening to snap the axle or topple the wagon into the void below. As they stopped to rest, Silas noticed a small tattered journal tucked into one of the crates. Curious, he picked it up. The pages were filled with maps, notes, and sketches in a language he didn't recognize. At the back, one name appeared repeatedly, written in delicate script. Nahele. Is this yours? He asked, holding it out carefully. Nahele's hand shot out faster than he expected, covering the journal. Her green eyes flared. That's personal, she said, her tone tight. It belonged to my mother. It's not for prying eyes. Close it. Silas nodded immediately, sensing the weight of her reaction. There were stories she wasn't ready to share, secrets that shaped her very existence. He returned the journal to its hiding place, leaving it untouched. The afternoon sun was at its peak when the canyon suddenly shuddered with a low rumble. A rock slide thundered down the path ahead, large boulders bouncing dangerously close to the wagon. Silas shouted a warning, and Nahele reacted with the precision of a seasoned warrior, yanking the wagon just out of harm's way. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, dust and gravel spraying into the air, coating their hair and clothes in a gritty film. That was too close. Silas panted. Nahele's jaw set, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Close is not enough," she said. "We have to move faster." As the day wore on, shadows began to lengthen in the canyon. Silas kept a wary eye on the cliffs, sensing danger even before it announced itself. He had lived long enough to recognize the feeling of being watched, of someone following with patience and intent. Nahele, ever alert, seemed to sense it too. Just as the light began to fade. They reached a narrow plateau overlooking the distant settlement of Salt Creek. Lights twinkled faintly in the evening haze, promising warmth, safety, and a place to rest. Relief washed over Silas, though it was tempered by unease. Something felt off, as if the canyon itself had one final challenge in store. From the shadows of the rocks, figures on horseback emerged silently. Silas squinted, seeing the glint of weapons and the familiar markings etched into their leather, armor symbols that matched no known gang or bandit group. Their leader, a tall man with a face scarred by old battles, raised a hand in a gesture that was both warning and command. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like gravel scraping over stone. Nahele's green eyes hardened. She mounted her horse without hesitation, her bow strung across her back. "This path belongs to those who respect it," she said. "We mean no harm." The standoff stretched on, the canyon silent except for the whisper of wind and the soft jingle of horse harnesses. Silas gripped his rifle, the tension coiling in his chest like a rattlesnake ready to strike. He could see the calculating gaze of the strangers, their muscles taut, hands hovering over weapons. "I don't like this," Silas muttered. "Neither do I," Nahele replied, her voice low and steady. "But running isn't an option. Not here, not now. We face it together." Slowly, the leader's hand dropped, and the group backed away, disappearing into the shadows like ghosts. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his pulse finally slowing. Nahele exhaled as well, but the tension remained. A reminder that the desert carried memory and warning in every stone. Night fell fully, and the stars above burned with fierce clarity, reflected in the calm determination in Nahele's eyes. Silas built a fire while Nahele secured the wagon, her hands never idle, her gaze never straying far from the canyon's edges. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that comes after shared danger and mutual respect. "Tomorrow," Silas said, throwing another log onto the fire, "we make the last stretch. Salt Creek is close. We'll get those supplies where they belong." Nahele's eyes softened, though her vigilance never wavered. "I hope so," she said. "The elders are counting on them. And the canyon ... It will test us to the end." Silas felt a strange sense of awe. Here was a woman who bore her responsibilities like armor, who faced dangers most men would flee from, and yet beneath that towering, unyielding exterior, there was a depth of care, of loyalty, that demanded respect. He realized he had never met anyone like her, and he doubted he ever would again. As they settled by the fire, the wind howled through the canyon, tugging at their cloaks and stirring sparks into the night sky. Silas watched Nahele, feeling a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and an unspoken connection forming between them. She had a past he knew, and a destiny that would shape not only her life but the lives of those who relied on her. And as the fire burned low, illuminating the rugged cliffs and the distant stars, Silas knew one thing for certain: this journey was far from over. The canyon had more secrets to reveal, more dangers to send their way, and deeper truths about Nahele that he had yet to understand. But for now, in the quiet of the night, they had survived. And that alone was a victory. Tomorrow would bring more challenge, more peril, and perhaps more revelations about the woman who was unlike anyone he had ever known. The first light of morning fell unevenly over the canyon, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl across the rocks. Silas woke to the faint creak of the wagon wheels as Nahele adjusted the ropes, her hands sure and precise despite the weariness in her frame. The night had been long, filled with the wind's mournful cries and distant howls of desert predators. Yet she moved with calm authority, as if every sound was a signal, every shadow a story she already understood. Silas rose, brushing dust from his clothes. "Early start," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb her concentration. Nahele's green eyes flicked toward him. "There's no time to waste. The canyon won't wait, and neither will those who follow it." Her tone carried a weight that made him pause. He had seen the way she reacted to danger, never reckless, always calculated, but the caution in her words hinted at knowledge he didn't yet share. They navigated through the narrow canyon paths, the wagon creaking with every uneven stone and sudden dip. Silas's boots kicked up small clouds of dust, and the horse's hooves struck the hard ground in a steady rhythm. The air was tense, filled with the heat of the rising sun and the unspoken awareness of being watched. Silas noticed the marks in the rock's deep scratches, symbols etched deliberately, and realized the canyon had stories far older than anyone in Salt Creek. Nahele glanced at the carvings briefly. "These are warnings," she said, "from my people. They speak of dangers, of travelers who did not heed the path's limits. The elders taught me their meanings." Silas nodded, impressed. "So the canyon tests you before anyone else even arrives." She gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It tests everything: strength, patience, trust." She paused and adjusted a wheel, her muscles flexing with the effort. "And sometimes it tests who you trust with your life." As they climbed higher, the canyon opened into a plateau that gave a sudden view of the desert beyond. Silas scanned the horizon, but the relief he felt at seeing open land was short-lived. Dust swirled at the far end of the plateau, and he could see faint shapes moving, men on horseback, approaching fast. Bandits, he thought first, but then the figures seemed larger, more disciplined. Nahele stiffened beside him, sensing his thoughts. "They aren't ordinary raiders," she said quietly. "These are hunters who know this land as well as we do. They follow old codes, old debts." Silas swallowed. "Old debts?" "They track my family, my people," Nahele said. Her voice hardened. "They wait for travelers to slip, to falter. They've been waiting for me." The first rider emerged from the dust, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to hold grudges from generations past. His companions flanked him silently, all carrying weapons carved with the same tribal symbols Nahele wore. Silas felt the tension coil like a spring in his chest. He glanced at Nahele. She was calm, almost eerily so, but he could see the fire in her eyes, the fierce determination that would not allow her to falter. "Step aside," one of the riders called, his voice carrying over the plateau. "This path is ours." Nahele shook her head. "It is not yours. You have no claim here." She mounted her horse, her movements fluid and commanding. Silas followed suit, gripping his rifle tightly, ready for whatever came next. The confrontation was a dance of strategy and instinct. Nahele moved with the precision of someone who had spent years anticipating every motion, every angle. She dismounted only when necessary, used ropes and stones as distractions, and leveraged her immense strength to protect the wagon. Silas covered her, picking off anyone who got too close, but the pressure was unrelenting. One of the riders broke through, slamming into the wagon with enough force to shake it violently. Silas fired, but the rider wasn't alone. Another appeared from the side, their movements coordinated like a hunting pack. Nahele's voice rang out, clear and commanding, guiding Silas to reposition, to anticipate each move. Hours seemed to pass in moments. Dust and sweat coated them both, their breaths ragged, their muscles aching. Yet Nahele never wavered, her green eyes blazing with focus. She pulled the wagon into a narrow alcove, using the rocks as a shield. And Silas realized something crucial. She knew the canyon as intimately as she knew herself. Every boulder, every drop, every shadow was part of her map. Finally, the riders hesitated. One of them, the leader, dismounted and raised a hand. "You are strong," he said, his voice grudging respect edged with threat. "But this path is not free for the taking." Nahele's jaw tightened. "It is free for those who respect it. And we have shown respect at every step. Now leave or face the consequences." The leader studied her, the canyon silent around them, before signaling his men to retreat. They melted back into the dust and rocks like shadows, leaving only silence and the wind. Silas exhaled heavily. "You faced them before," he said, awe and disbelief in his voice. Nahele's gaze drifted toward the retreating figures. "Not these ones," she admitted, "but I've faced others. They test loyalty, strength, and willpower. The canyon does not forgive weakness." She turned her attention back to the wagon, inspecting every rope and wheel. "We're not done yet. Salt Creek is close, but the last stretch will be the hardest." They moved cautiously, aware that the plateau beyond the canyon held both promise and danger. The wagon rattled over uneven stone as they descended, the desert air hot and dry, the sun beating down relentlessly. Silas rode beside Nahele, keeping a sharp eye on the horizon. Despite the trials of the day, he felt a growing respect and something deeper for her. She carried burdens with a strength he could barely imagine, and she had trusted him enough to survive alongside her as evening approached. They found a small ravine to camp in, hidden from the wind and prying eyes. Silas started a fire while Nahele tended the wagon, securing crates and checking wheels one last time. The silence between them was comfortable, a quiet acknowledgement of shared struggle. "You're remarkable," Silas said finally, breaking the stillness. "I've seen strong women, but you're different. You carry everything and still keep moving forward." Nahele looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and for a moment she allowed herself a small smile. "Strength is survival," she said softly. "But it's not just me. This wagon carries more than supplies, it carries responsibility. And sometimes people need more than strength, they need trust." Silas nodded, understanding. Trust had been the currency of the day, the only thing that had allowed them to survive the canyon and the hunters who had pursued them. He could see that Nahele's past had forged her into someone who understood this truth better than most. As the night deepened, the canyon settled into a hush broken only by the crackle of their fire. The stars hung high and cold above them, glittering like shards of glass in the black sky. Silas watched Nahele as she secured the wagon one final time, her movements deliberate and precise. And he realized that every scar, every line on her face, every tension in her body told a story of survival and resilience. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, "Tomorrow, we finish this. We get those supplies to Salt Creek, and this canyon will be behind us." Nahele's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Tomorrow, yes," she agreed. "But the canyon has a memory. We carry it with us, even when we reach safety. Never forget that, Silas." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. She was more than a companion or ally. She was a force of nature, shaped by a land that demanded courage and respect. And in facing that land alongside her, he had discovered a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The fire burned down to embers, the night pressing in around them, and for the first time, Silas allowed himself to relax slightly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps even more dangerous than today, but he was ready. They had survived together, and the bond forged in fire and dust could not easily be broken. Nahele leaned against the wagon, eyes scanning the horizon one last time before allowing herself a rare moment of rest. Silas settled beside her, rifle within reach, watching over the camp. In the quiet of the desert night, amidst the towering cliffs and whispering wind, both of them understood one thing: the journey was far from over, and the true test of their courage, skill, and trust lay ahead at Salt Creek. But for now, they had survived, and that was enough. The dawn broke over Salt Creek with a pale, golden light that spilled across the wooden rooftops and dust-choked streets. The settlement looked peaceful from a distance, but Silas knew better. The town had its own history of hardships, bandits, and whispered rivalries, and the canyon had prepared them for more than just rough terrain. It had sharpened their instincts for danger. Silas nudged his horse forward, glancing at Nahele. She sat tall in her saddle, the morning sun glinting off the silver beads in her braid. Her eyes scanned the settlement with a mixture of caution and determination. The wagon, now repaired and steady, carried the crates of supplies that the elders had waited for with quiet anticipation. "Almost there," Silas said. "One more stretch." Nahele nodded, but her jaw was set. "The canyon taught us everything except what we'll face here. Settlements hold their own dangers. Not all battles are fought on open ground." As they entered the outskirts of Salt Creek, a small group of townsfolk emerged from their homes and shops, eyeing the approaching wagon and the towering woman beside it. Whispers traveled quickly through the dusty streets. Some recognized Nahele, some knew of her reputation, and others were merely curious. Silas could feel the tension in the air, the same tension that had accompanied them through the canyon. Only now it had shifted into anticipation, suspicion, and quiet awe. A figure stepped forward from the crowd, an elder with a weathered face and a walking stick carved with intricate patterns. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of Nahele, her massive frame, and the loaded wagon. "Nahele," he breathed, "you've returned safely, and you've brought these supplies?" Nahele nodded, dismounting carefully. She moved with surprising grace for someone her size, adjusting the bow on her back and patting the side of the wagon. "All accounted for," she said. "Every crate. The elders should have what they need." Silas followed her down, stretching his legs and letting the horse wander briefly while keeping one eye on the crowd. "You handled that canyon like a master," he said quietly, admiration lacing his words. "And these people, you've earned their trust before you even handed over the supplies." Nahele's expression softened just slightly. "It's not just me. The canyon, the challenges, they teach lessons that survive even when the dust settles." She glanced at the crates, checking for damage one last time. "I hope the elders find what they need." The elder stepped closer, his gaze scanning the contents of the wagon. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the crates, as if the weight of relief and gratitude pressed down upon him. These will save lives," he said. "You've done more than deliver supplies. You've ensured the survival of our people." Nahele bowed her head, acknowledging his words. For a moment, the tension that had clung to her for weeks seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet pride. Silas, observing her, felt a deep respect swelling in his chest. He had known she was strong, but seeing her receive recognition for her deeds so quietly, so humbly added a new dimension to the woman he had come to admire. Just as the elder was about to guide Nahele toward the community center, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. Several mounted men, their faces masked, had arrived in a sudden coordinated charge. They carried weapons and markings that immediately signaled trouble, the same style of hunters that had pursued them through the canyon. Silas reacted instinctively, raising his rifle and moving beside Nahele. "They followed us," he muttered. Nahele's green eyes narrowed. "I thought we shook them in the canyon." "They didn't give up," Silas said. They've waited for the right moment. The riders split, aiming to block the wagon and cut off the townsfolk from intervening. Silas fired a warning shot into the ground, and Nahele drew her bow with lightning speed. An arrow loosed that clipped the lead horse's reins and sent the rider sprawling. The townsfolk scattered for cover, their gasps mixing with the pounding of hooves on the dirt streets. Nahele moved like a storm, her massive frame deceptively agile as she swung herself onto the wagon to gain higher ground. With a series of swift, calculated maneuvers, she knocked weapons from hands, tripped riders with ropes, and created openings for Silas to cover her flank. The two of them worked in seamless coordination, their trust forged in the canyon now tested under the eyes of the town. The leader of the attackers, a scarred man with cold, gray eyes, dismounted and charged at Nahele directly. Silas intercepted him, forcing him back with a swing of his rifle butt. Nahele used the moment to grab a rope dangling from the wagon, swinging it like a whip to entangle the man's legs. He fell hard onto the dirt, coughing and groaning. The battle seemed endless, but the tide shifted when the townsfolk, emboldened by Nahele's skill, joined in. Farmers wielding pitchforks, blacksmiths grabbing hammers, and even a few young men with rifles stood beside her, inspired by her courage. The attackers hesitated, then began to retreat, recognizing that their numbers and strategy were no match for the unity of those they sought to intimidate. Finally, silence fell over the street. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the sun cast long, golden shadows over the defeated attackers as they fled into the desert beyond the settlement. Nahele lowered her bow, chest heaving, eyes scanning the horizon for any remaining threat. Silas, breathing hard, wiped sweat and dust from his forehead and allowed himself a brief smile. "You did it," he said, voice filled with admiration. "Every time they came at us, you handled it. I've never seen anyone fight like that." Nahele shook her head, almost in disbelief at the chaos that had just passed. "It wasn't just me. We survived because we had to and because they wouldn't let the wagon be taken. The canyon teaches you more than skill. It teaches survival, but it also teaches responsibility." Silas nodded, his gaze drifting to the elder, who now approached once more with cautious steps. "You've brought us more than supplies," the man said. "You've brought hope. Salt Creek will thrive because of you." Nahele's shoulders relaxed slightly for the first time in weeks. She looked at Silas, and the corners of her mouth lifted in a fleeting smile. "It's done," she said softly. "The journey is over. The canyon, the hunters, they are behind us. This is where our work ends." Silas studied her, feeling a strange mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper, an unspoken connection that had grown stronger with every mile of desert, every threat faced, and every moment of trust shared. "You carried more than crates," he said quietly. "You carried strength, courage, and you inspired people along the way." Nahele's green eyes met his, unwavering and honest. "And you," she said, her voice low, "carried more than a rifle. You carried trust. And that is what mattered most." The townsfolk began to emerge from their hiding places, clapping, cheering, and offering gratitude in hushed tones and smiles. Nahele and Silas helped unload the crates, ensuring that every piece of medicine, food, and blanket reached the elders. There was laughter now, a warmth in the air that had been absent through the trials of the canyon dot as the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Nahele and Silas stood beside the now empty wagon, surveying the town that had been saved by their combined courage and skill. The canyon was behind them, its secrets and tests already fading into memory, and ahead lay the promise of peace, recognition, and perhaps something more between them. Silas broke the silence. "So, what happens now?" Nahele considered, her gaze softening as she watched the townsfolk carry supplies into the settlement. "Now," she said slowly, we rest. We ensure the people are safe. And we remember what the canyon taught us. Strength alone is not enough. Survival, trust, and courage, that is what matters. Silas nodded, smiling. I've learned a lot from you. More than I expected. And I'll admit, I've never met anyone like you. For the first time, Nahele allowed herself to truly relax. She let the weight of weeks of worry and tension fall from her shoulders. And you've taught me something too, she said. That even in the harshest places, people can rise to the challenge. That help and trust can come from unexpected places. The night settled over Salt Creek, stars shining brilliantly over the settlement, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Nahele and Silas sat near the wagon, sharing water and a quiet moment of companionship. Both of them feeling the relief and triumph of survival. In the days that followed, the elders praised Nahele's leadership and Silas's bravery. The supplies were distributed, lives were saved, and the town had reason to hope once more. And though Nahele's past remained partly a mystery, the bond formed with Silas was undeniable, two souls tested by fire, dust, and danger, and emerging stronger for a dot as the sun set fully. Nahele and Silas mounted their horses, preparing to leave Salt Creek behind. The canyon and desert would always hold memories of the journey, the battles, and the lessons learned. But the town, the people, and the bond they had forged would endure, a testament to courage, trust, and resilience in the unforgiving Old West. Silas looked at Nahele as they rode side by side into the fading light. So, partner, he said with a grin, where to next? Nahele glanced at him, a faint smile curving her lips. Wherever the trail leads, she replied. Together. And with that, they rode into the horizon, leaving dust and echoes of danger behind, carrying with them the strength, trust, and courage that had carried them through the canyon and would carry them through whatever the West might throw their way next.